Masamune is an up-and-coming light novel author whose works are illustrated by Manga sensei. In addition to writing, going to school, and having a life, he's also a caretaker for his shut-in little sister, Sagiri. When he discovers that the Manga is actually a sister, their relationship is reignited. Eventually, the two dream of having their light novel adapted as an anime, and they work together to make it a reality. Along the way, they meet fellow authors, all of whom have dreams of their own. Masamune first met his stepsister, Sagiri, a year ago, but after a certain incident, she became a recluse, and he hasn't talked to her since. Regardless, he still cooks her meals, always leaving behind notes asking her to come out. Masamune is the semi-popular author of Silver Wolf of Reincarnation, working with his artist, Manga sensei, whom he has never met. After his first meeting signing, Masamune sees a comment on a blog bashing his signature. His friend Tomoe points out that the comment is on Manga sensei's blog. He doesn't know if he offended him, but he did once complain that his name, Manga, is embarrassing to have on his light novels. Tomoe tells Masamune about Manga's scheduled livestream and suggests that he listen in. After making supper for Sagiri, Masamune watches the stream, but he notices in the background the food he made for Sagiri. Sagiri begins changing clothes, forgetting to cut the stream. Masamune slams on Sagiri's door just in time to warn her. Sagiri's door opens and the two siblings reunite. However, she denies being Manga sensei and shuts the door in his face. The next day, Masamune drops by ASCII Media Works to meet his editor, Ayame. He drops several manuscripts and proposals for new serializations, explaining that though he started writing because he enjoyed it, he now needs to write for money. Ayame understands and hands him an envelope to cheer him up. Masamune is touched to see that it contains a final art spread of all his characters drawn by Sagiri, as he didn't expect to see his beloved characters ever again. He admits to Sagiri that he's the author of Silver Wolf of Reincarnation, and she lets him in. Masamune compliments how good her lewd illustrations are, though she's embarrassed about it. She recounts that she started drawing after being encouraged by her mother, but after her death, she couldn't bring herself to draw. It was only after watching someone else stream their art that she was inspired to begin again, and it was something that gave her immense joy. Masamune recounts a similar experience in middle school when he received his first fan mail after writing a story. Masamune is happy that they can talk like family, but Sagiri's mood suddenly sours at the mention of family, and she asks him to leave. Masamune shows her the final drawing she made, but she maintains it was something she drew out of obligation. Megumi, the extroverted class representative of Sagiri's, comes to visit, hoping to draw Sagiri out of her room. Masamune knocks on Sagiri's door, but she demands that he kick Megumi out. When he chooses to talk to her for a bit, Sagiri has him wear a receiver. Megumi explains that she wants to befriend Sagiri because she's passionate about making friends. She suggests cutting off their internet, but Masamune won't stand for something so draconian. Eventually, Megumi realizes Sagiri is listening in, and Megumi charms Masamune to provoke her. While he's distracted by Sagiri's thumping, Megumi swipes his phone, but hands it over right away. She secretly calls Sagiri and asks Masamune what he thinks of his sister. He says she's his pride and joy. After Megumi leaves, Masamune knocks on Sagiri's door, but she refuses to answer. She's still flustered by a shockingly honest answer. Ayame calls Masamune to tell him all his proposals were rejected, and he spends the night cramming a new one. The next day, he visits Takasago Books and is disappointed to see nobody buying his books. He tries putting them on top of Alf-sensei's works, but Tomoe stops him. At the office, he sees Ayame arguing with a little girl and learns that she's the famous Alf-sensei. Alf demands that she be partnered up with Manga, whose art she admires. She mocks Masamune, saying Manga would be better off with someone like herself. Ayame gets Alf to leave, but she reminds Masamune that Alf is right. He needs to come up with something good and fast. When he arrives home, he begs Sagiri not to abandon him, though she has no idea what he's talking about. She complains that the snacks he brought back are more like offerings to Buddha. Before she closes the door, she says she'll wash her own underwear from now on and asks him not to touch them anymore. Masamune is devastated. Masamune drives Sagiri's class away after they show up shouting her name. Afterwards, Megumi hands him a neighborhood circular and asks why it wasn't delivered directly. He says that there are rumors that the area is haunted, and Megumi spots movement in the adjacent house. Masamune checks in on Sagiri, but she's equally spooked by the sound of a piano. Masamune investigates and finds a naked Alf playing the piano. She explains she moved to Tokyo because her light novel is being adapted into an anime, a fact she repeatedly brags about. She invites Masamune into her home, which she dubs the Crystal Palace. Eventually, the two argue, with Masamune criticizing her overuse of fan service, while Alf mocks his low sales. To see who is more deserving of having Manga as an artist, they compete over who can produce a more interesting story, with Manga as the judge. When Masamune returns to Sagiri, Alf shoots arrows from her balcony. When Sagiri learns that he saw Alf naked, she kicks him out. The next day, Alf shows Masamune her personal studio. revealing that she has deduced Eromanga-sensei is living nearby. Masamune notices Sagiri streaming and is relieved that Elf does not realize who it is. Masamune reassures Elf that he will make sure Eromanga reads her manuscript. Elf asks how Masamune became one of her fans, and he explains that reading one of her works cheered him up after his mom died. When he said it saved him, Elf blushes. 2 weeks later, Masamune is exasperated that Elf has yet to begin on her manuscript, but she insists on working only when inspired. Elf is stunned to learn that Masamune writes even when he isn't motivated, and she criticizes his work ethic. When Masamune realizes that Elf treats writing as a game, he becomes frustrated and leaves. However, Elf invites him again the next day so he can see her work process for himself. Elf cooks Masamune a delicious meal, explaining that she uses such experiences as references for her books. He realizes that, though she treats writing as a hobby, she still takes it seriously. When he returns home, Sagiri is upset with him for hanging out with a neighbor, and even more so when he continues to keep his contest with Elf a secret. To make up, Masamune says he plans to write a light novel with her as the heroine, but she says that isn't touching at all, just gross, and kicks him out. 2 weeks pass, and Masamune hasn't spoken to Sagiri since. He arrives at Elf's house, where she's still putting the finishing touches on her manuscript, which he only started the day before. As they read each other's work, Masamune is astounded by how good the story is. However, Elf is even more moved by his work, and she realizes that it was made with his sister, Eromanga-sensei, in mind. Elf concedes defeat but says she won't lose next time. Masamune jumps across the balcony and lands on top of Sagiri. She shows off her progress over the last 2 weeks in broadening her drawing style. She can now draw battle scenes and girls with large chests. Sagiri was afraid that their neighbor was his new illustrator, so she tried to improve. Masamune reveals that their neighbor is Elf-sensei, and he was also worried that she'd leave him to work with her. He explains the contest they had, and that he managed to win. The two shake hands, looking forward to working together. Sagiri reads Masamune's manuscript, and she grows a bright red with every passing page and says nobody else should read it, since it would be too embarrassing. However, she suddenly says she's in love with someone, and Masamune's heart shatters. Elf is amused that Masamune was rejected, but he says that he and Sagiri have a new dream, to get their work animated and watch it together. Due to a misunderstanding, Masamune thinks that Sagiri is in love with someone else. Annoyed that her brother failed to notice her feelings, she screeches out, "Idiot!" Masamune asks Sagiri to help him with his story proposal by drawing a lewd young sister, and she reluctantly gives it a shot. After sketching a prototype, Masamune asks her to make the character cuter, like Sagiri herself. They notice a strange sound, which turns out to be Elf. She begs Masamune to hide her since Full Drive Publishing has sent supervisors to make sure she's working. He agrees on the condition she help him write a project proposal. Elf agrees to help them write the proposal, but she wants to play some games with Sagiri first. Masamune buys them snacks and is glad that Sagiri has made a friend. When he arrives home, he sees Elf lifting her skirt, and she explains that Sagiri wanted to draw girls' underwear. Soon Full Drive Publishing arrive and they drag Elf away. Sagiri shows Masamune her drawing of Elf, and he decides to include her as a character in his novel. However, this leads to a serious problem. Sagiri can no longer draw anything but lolly characters, and she asks Masamune to find a tall busty girl she can use as a muse. He later receives a call from Megumi, is frustrated to learn that Sagiri has made a friend since she wanted to be her first. She asks to meet him at Takasago Books to consult him on how she can be friends with Sagiri. When Masamune arrives, he shares Sagiri's current predicament with Tomoe, who has no problem being used as a muse, except for showing her underwear. When Megumi arrives, she reveals that she knows Masamune is a light novel author. She plans to get closer to Sagiri by reading creepy otaku novels, a comment that outrages Masamune and Tomoe. Tomoe nearly strangles Megumi, but Masamune stops her. Learning the gist of the situation, Tomoe decides to exact revenge by getting Megumi addicted to light novels. As expected, Megumi is hooked, but she suffers from the snail's pace of new chapters. Masamune suggests she use her newfound interest in light novels to borrow some from his sister. Masamune convinces Sagiri to lend her a few books, but only if Megumi poses for reference material. Megumi, a former amateur model, agrees. As per Sagiri's conditions, Megumi is blindfolded, restrained, and led into a room. Megumi feels uncomfortable under Sagiri's piercing gaze. Masamune accuses Megumi of only pretending to be promiscuous because it's cool. Unable to help herself, Sagiri pulls down Megumi's underwear, causing her to cry. Sagiri undoes her restraints and apologizes to her. Megumi is glad she can finally talk to Sagiri, and they quickly reconcile. As promised, Sagiri gives her some of her favorite light novels. Megumi politely asks for her underwear back. Ayami approves Masamune's manuscript, but publishing won't start until next May since they are prioritizing the work of their ace, Muramasa. This puts Masamune in a bind as he has to deal with his aunt. As long as he keeps publishing books, he and Sagiri can continue living together. Sagiri offers to draw lewd photos for cash, but he refuses. Elf offers to help as her brother is also an editor. They have lunch at a cafe where Elf brags about how many sales her books are producing, but she's frustrated that Muramasa is beating her. When they arrive at ASCII, they encounter a girl in traditional garb, and Elf is rude and condescending to her. When they meet with Ayami, Masamune insists on having his book published this year, and she invites him to enter a writing contest, whose winner will have their work published in September. Masamune excitedly signs up for the sake of his dream, but the girl next to them says his dream pales in comparison to hers. She also signs up, revealing herself to be Muramasa. Muramasa, a best-selling author with over 14 million sold copies, reveals that she intentionally took away Masamune's slot to get in the way of his dream. To put the matter to rest, they agree to compete in the upcoming writing contest. Masamune apologizes to Sagiri for putting their dream on the line, but Sagiri understands his feelings. Elf barges in and Masamune shares his plans of using his little sister novel, rewritten as a short story, to compete. Elf puts him through a harsh energy drink-powered training montage to write a short story. The day before the deadline, Muramasa suddenly shows up at their front door, inviting Masamune to write under her with a promise of just compensation. While watching Muramasa write, they realize she doesn't even know the titles of her own books. She simply writes them and hands them off to the publisher. She started writing because she could not find any interesting novels, so she had to write one herself. Masamune finds this impossible, as there should be at least one story she likes. She says that there is, but she can no longer read its continuation. She says that her dream is to write a novel so good that it is worth 1 million points, and to write as much as it takes until she's satisfied with herself. Masamune asks why Muramasa insists on crushing his dream, and she replies that she has always admired his battle genre light novels, especially Silver Wolf of Reincarnation. When she learned he submitted a romance novel proposal due to his financial difficulties, she offered to let him write under her instead. However, Sagiri will not give up her brother, and neither will Masamune give up on his dream. On the day of the results announcement, Elf pokes fun at Masamune for rejecting Muramasa's earlier confession of love. Masamune hurriedly tells Sagiri that they won. As they celebrate, Elf remarks that they only won because Muramasa was disqualified for exceeding the page limit. Sagiri is wearing a yukata, though Masamune doesn't know why. She says she heard of Muramasa's confession to him, and though he admits he likes her, there's already a number 1 in his heart, Sagiri. A flustered Sagiri calls him an idiot. The next day, Masamune heads off to the editorial department for crunch time on his novel, leaving behind Sagiri. Later, she watches a girl and her sisters being interviewed for the fireworks festival. The following day, Masamune meets Elf on the way home. She shares that Shido, the author he beat at the writing contest, is inviting him and the others to a wrap-up party. Masamune feels things might be awkward with Muramasa, but after a quick phone call, she's actually excited to see him again. Ayami smirks in the background. The next day, Shido arrives. When Muramasa and Elf arrive, Shido observes that Masamune is quite popular with the two. Sagiri loudly says that he already has someone he likes, so there's no reason for him to be popular. After starting the party, Shido gives Elf some homemade sweets, saying he dreams of one day collaborating with a sweets company for his stories. Elf shares her dream of writing the ultimate light novel to conquer the world, while Muramasa wants to write a light novel that will satisfy her. Izumi shares his is to watch an anime based on his work and watch it with his little sister. Sagiri shares her dream, to be the bride of the man she loves. That night, Masamune shares that he's afraid of being alone, especially after his mother died in an accident. Sagiri says she knows Masamune wants to have a family, and though she never thought of him as such, she will play along for a bit. Elf takes everyone on a trip to her private island for a riding camp. Masamune is reluctant to leave Sagiri alone, but she says this will be a good opportunity for him. During the meetup, Masamune is surprised to see Muramasa in a white sundress, which was part of a secret agreement she had with Sagiri. When they arrive at the island, they meet Chris, Elf's older brother and editor. On their way to the hotel, Masamune realizes he doesn't know anyone's real names. Shido says his is just his real name in katakana, while Muramasa and Elf refuse to give theirs. After settling in at the hotel, Elf drags Masamune along to recreate popular rom-com tropes. She coaxes him into lathering sunblock on her, but he freezes when he sees Chris watching. Muramasa arrives, having mustered up the courage to wear the swimsuit Elf laid out for her. He learns she came along because she wanted to read some of his stories. He promises to let her read some of his shelved works and to write her a Silver Wolf Reincarnation epilogue. After a day at the beach, Masamune soaks in the baths with Chris. He asks him if he'd consider marrying Elf. Masamune acknowledges that Elf has a lot of praiseworthy points, and if he didn't already love someone, he would have fallen in love with Elf 5 times over. Elf overhears this. Masamune has a video call with Sagiri and shares how his day went. She shows him some of her work, telling him to hurry up and come home. Elf takes Masamune to a nearby forest, which serves as a setting for one of her novels and where her father proposed to her mother. She reveals that after her father died, her mother ensured she received a strict education, which is partly why Chris left home at a young age. However, Elf still wants to choose who she wants to marry, and she says Masamune is a candidate. Masamune is embarrassed, and Elf swears that she'll make him love her. Elf reveals her true name, Emily, and tells him to use that when he proposes. As promised, Masamune lets Muramasa read some of his older works, including the epilogue story of Silver Wolf of Reincarnation. The next day, Muramasa prepares breakfast for them, and Elf acknowledges that this is her loss. For fun, Masamune calls her Emily, but Elf reminds him to only use that name to propose. To ensure there isn't any goofing off, Chris personally drags Elf away and forces her to work. While working together, Muramasa is embarrassed to discover that everyone knew her earlier story entry for the writing contest was a love letter to Masamune. Since the cat is out of the bag, Muramasa proudly declares her love for Masamune. Elf tells Masamune not to be fooled by Muramasa's cuteness, and she correctly suspects that Muramasa has pretend conversations with Masamune. Masamune asks Muramasa to stop that, and it's kind of creepy. Muramasa is devastated. Chris leaves them alone for the time being, and Elf drags them all into playing King's Game. However, Shido drops out after he is nearly forced to kiss Masamune. They decide to have Sagiri play as the king instead. She has Elf remove an article of clothing and asks Muramasa what kind of underwear she's wearing. However, they realize she's going commando. Chris returns soon after, scolding Elf and telling her to be more like Muramasa, but Muramasa abruptly says she will no longer write novels. When they ask her about it over barbecue, she says that with Masamune writing interesting novels for her, she no longer has to chase her dream. But Elf says a writing not like Muramasa will always have a reason to write. Later, Masamune pulls Muramasa aside to show him fan letters he has been receiving from a middle school girl, which have always given him courage and hope. He realizes this girl is Muramasa after recognizing her handwriting. He encourages her to keep writing, as it is a shame to stop simply because one of her dreams has come true. Muramasa decides to continue being an author, but she has also found a new dream, to have Masamune fall in love with her. When Masamune arrives home, Sagiri flashes her swimsuit for a moment. They both hope they can go to the beach together one day. Later, Masamune brings Sagiri along to attend the launch of their new book, The Cutest Little Sister in the World. He recounts how he first started writing 5 years ago as a way of coping with the death of his mother. Sagiri recounts how she was a shut-in around the same time, but she won't say the reason why. In a flashback, Sagiri discovers the adventures of Masamune the hero, Masamune's first online work. After leaving a comment, she and Masamune began talking, with the former posing as a college student. One day, Masamune is inspired to become a professional author after Sagiri drew his characters in an art spread. Although Masamune never met Sagiri or realized she would later become his stepsister, he thought the two were friends. Soon, Sagiri would routinely draw illustrations for Masamune's work. Sagiri's mother offers to teach her how to draw better, but Sagiri turns her down. When Sagiri learns Masamune writes so that she can enjoy his stories, she's inspired to return to school. After his middle school graduation, Masamune decides to submit several story proposals, with his father's help. He messages Sagiri to tell her he plans to become a professional author and that he has enjoyed collaborating with him. Sagiri likewise says she will no longer draw for him nor contact him, not until she becomes better. Thus, they promise to meet again, and once they are both talented professionals, they'll work on another story together. Back in the present, Masamune and Sagiri arrive at Akihabara, and after touring the mecca of otaku, they go see their book launch. Masamune is anxious to see if people will like it, but he passes by Kurino, excitedly talking about his new book. Though Kuroneko praises the art, she expresses skepticism at its no-name author. Hearing this, Masamune and Sagiri are touched, and as Masamune hopes they find his new work interesting, Kyosuke looks back at him. When he arrives home, Sagiri, who has managed to leave her room, congratulates him on his new novel. Sagiri tells Masamune that Muramasa and Elf are coming over as a part of their agreement for letting him go to writing camp. Masamune pats Sagiri in the head so he can come up with inspiration for book 2 of his novel, but when Sagiri senses his lewd gaze, she kicks him out. Masamune meets Elf, who reveals that she and Muramasa are here to act as models for Sagiri, though Muramasa doesn't know that. Muramasa refuses to model, but she's persuaded that it is all for Masamune's sake. When Sagiri sees her brother imagining Muramasa and Elf in swimsuits, she kicks him out. Sagiri has them play Twister, and once she sees them in a good pose, she starts sketching. However, when she notices Tomoe, a girl she's never seen before, she forces Muramasa and Elf to hold their poses while she conducts some reconnaissance. Tomoe congratulates Masamune on his new work, and she gives him an R18 doujinshi based on some of Manga's artwork. She sees Sagiri watching them and waves at her. As she leaves, Tomoe says if he ever becomes rich and famous, she wouldn't mind becoming his wife. When Masamune returns, Sagiri snatches the doujinshi, eager to see her characters in R-rated situations. After reading it, she swears to draw something much more exciting. She presents them all with her R18 doujinshi, based on Masamune's novel. As Masamune reads it, he realizes that it practically depicts him and Sagiri. The most problematic part is that the male anatomy is all wrong. He tries to get Elf to explain it, but though her face goes red, she's equally clueless as to what the problem is. Sagiri and Elf try to rip his pants off so they can see the real thing, and in desperation, Masamune calls Megumi, asking her to teach Sagiri about male anatomy. She sends a small diagram of her boyfriend, which turns out to be that of her little brother. Sagiri and Elf find it to be cute. Tired of the misinformation, Muramasa sketches a highly detailed drawing of Michelangelo's David, causing them all to brand her as the lewdest among them. Masamune sees Muramasa and Elf off and asks them to visit again. To his surprise, Sagiri opens her window and waves goodbye.